Coming up this week on the Digital Lifestyle Show 817, Gary's here and we've got lots to catch up on. We've had a few guests recently, so we've got some news to catch up on. We're talking about Windows 11 and where we're up to with that. Got some Surface Duo, some EV updates and lots more. So let's get straight to Gary. Gary, good evening.
Good evening, Ian. It's good to be back in vision.
Yeah, in vision, yeah, again. And we had, it was good show last week. We've had a good run of interviews recently as well.
Oh, that was brilliant last week. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah. So we have got more interviews planned and hopefully some from the Windows Insider team even. But and you can send questions in for that as well. If you've got any questions for Windows Insider team, we're setting it up. So probably sometime next month. But yeah, you can get those questions to me now. You can email them in at thisLifestyle.com or you can send them on Twitter at iStixon. Cool. So I thought what we'd do tonight is we've got a bit of catching up to do. We've been having interviews and things like that and guests for the last few weeks. I thought we'll do a bit of catching up and start with the Windows 11 news. So we've had a few builds of Windows 11 since we last talked. I can't even remember what the last build was. I think it was like it was 120. I think at the time.
Yeah, something like that, wasn't it? There's been a few more since then.
Yeah. So Windows 11 seems to be coming on quite nicely. I've got it installed on my Surface Laptop 2 in the beta channel. And I've got it on my Surface Go in the on the dev channel as well. So currently, both builds running on the same or both channels running the same build. So I don't know if you tried a chance to play with it yet. I
haven't had the computer I normally run Windows 11 on decided to die on me, so I haven't actually set a new one up yet to do testing on. I need to borrow your Lumia. That'll be the answer.
Yes, and we'll talk about that. Shortly. So I've been trying it on various devices. So far I've got it on the Raspberry Pi 400, which works really well. I know we talked about that a few shows ago. That's still up and running. I've not had to wipe it or anything else like that. And yeah, it's working brilliantly. There's only one thing that's not quite right is the video drivers or the generic drivers, or the default video drivers for Windows 11. So you don't get all the rounded corners everywhere. But yeah, apart from that, it works. And I even installed Visual Studio on there today.
Well, that's cool. That's a real developer's tool now.
Yeah, so that's the Raspberry Pi 400 ARM-based, and I got the version of Visual Studio from the store. Although it's it's the Intel version, so it runs under emulation. It did warn me as well before I ran it that that would be the case. But yeah, it installed and it does start up. So I'm pretty impressed with that. But I've tried all sorts of things on there on the Raspberry Pi. So all the apps that I've tried have worked from the store. If you can get ARM-based versions of the applications, then they work perfectly well. The Intel emulated ones are a bit slower, but they worked. I got your phone working as well. I couldn't get the Android apps working and the screen mirroring from the phone to the PC, because your phone is actually, although it came in pre-installed with Windows 11, it is the Intel version and not an ARM version. So I'm not sure whether there is an ARM version, so maybe someone with the Surface Pro X would be able to tell whether there's a special ARM version. But anyway, it works.
Very impressive.
I also, and like you said, the other thing that I did get is the Lumia. Has my camera gone green?
You seem to have frozen. Yeah, I haven't spotted, but you have frozen.
That's on. There we go.
That's better. Yeah, you're unfrozen.
Yeah, there may be a Windows 11 bug there. So here we have the Lumia 950 XL running the Intel version, running the ARM version of Windows 11, and it's amazing to think that this is what 6-year-old device now. This
yeah
came with Windows 10 mobile, not the desktop version, a special mobile version. And here we have with the full version of Windows 11 on here as well. And actually this is slightly better because it has the proper video drivers, so you get all the nice rounded corners on here. You've got the new version of Teams is on here, the new version of the store, and all the settings and everything else. And so that's using the Windows on ARM project for Lumia to create the installer, which they have a really nice tool. So and now you can get the ISOs for Windows 10 as well, which, because since we last talked the Windows 10 ISOs, we'll come back to that shortly. But yeah, so that's up and running. But yeah, it's brilliant. It works. All the themes are supported, all the translucencies and everything else. And it's fairly responsive as well. It's got all the the applications are installed on here. So you've got Edge and all the mobile, all the standard apps that you'd expect that ship with Windows 10. The team that do that installation have already also put a dialer on here as well, so you can actually use the old Windows 10 dialer on here and use it as a phone. I haven't put a SIM card in it to try this yet. This is running on Wi-Fi at the moment, but it does. The data does work on it as well if you wanted to get data on there. But yeah, there's Edge up and running as well. It gets a little warm and you don't get massive battery life, but still, it's an impressive project to think that this is a very old device, never designed to run desktop Windows. Never mind Windows 11 didn't even exist in Satch's mind when this was launched. Amazing. Back then. But yeah, it does work. So yeah, it works. Auto rotate's working on there as well. So a few people have asked me, saying, "Oh, it's ridiculous. Why would you want to use that as a daily driver?" I don't. This is just one of those things, because you can. So
yeah,
I've got that installed.
So installing Visual Studio on there would make a great support tool.
yeah, and it would. I haven't tried it, but Visual Studio will install on here. If you've got this, I presume it maybe needs a bit of storage space, but we'll see. And also, it gets all the updates as well. So this is running the latest 1.6.0 build that came out last week. So we've got the very latest build on here. So quite funny to see that last week. So when the build was released, I had it on here at the same time as I was getting it on the PC as well. I've been quite impressed with that. So, and talking of builds, we're on 22.0.0.160 at the moment. There's not a huge amount of features coming to these builds at the moment. As we mentioned before, they're on the beta and the dev channel on the same. Mm-hmm. So that's why. So I think their focus is on getting the version that's ready to be released as well. I think that's the key thing there, isn't it? Yeah.
This is. So I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes at the moment, but not much we're seeing.
Yeah, I think the main change on .160 was the new in terms of the operating system. There was a lot of background things, a lot of fixes, but for actually what you see is there's this new clock app which links with Spotify. I don't know if you've seen this.
I haven't seen that, but that sounds fun.
Yeah, so this I can't show it on this machine because I'm on my laptop, which although gets the same build, because it's on the beta channel, it doesn't get the one. It doesn't get the updated apps. The only updated apps only come through if you're on the dev channel. So although they're identical builds, the apps aren't going out to that. Whether that'll change, I'm sure. I've got a feeling it will at some point, but I've got it on the build video. But yeah, this is it. It's called focus sessions. So what you would do is you link the clock app with your Spotify account, and then you can say, right, I'm going to work for 30 minutes now, and focus for 30 minutes, and you get your music going in the background, and it gives you a little sort of clock to count down with that as well. The idea is that you can have these focus sessions. So interesting idea. I'm not sure I'd ever use it, but I'm not probably disciplined enough to focus for 30 minutes. But I do like the idea of it, and this interaction with Spotify as well sounds good. And it does make me wonder whether we'll see further integration of other services into Windows. Maybe the Spotify app from Spotify is okay, but wouldn't it be good if it was sort of Groove Music got a new lease of life and was replaced and was a proper Spotify client, a native client?
There's a thought.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll have to write a new version of our book.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so those are the main, that was the main changes on 1.6.0. I'm trying to think. I'm now racking my brain to think what's on the other previous builds, one before that. Oh, we did get some updated apps on the previous builds as well. So, and this is one new thing is we've got I mentioned the clock. The snipping tool has been replaced. Well, actually, what they said is the snipping tool has been updated with Windows 10. I've got the video of all these as well, so if you're a bit curious, you can see these on the YouTube channel. So Microsoft said the snipping tool has been updated with the Windows 11 version of it, and they've merged it effectively with the snipping tool. But what I think is they've got rid of the old one and called the snip and sketch. They've called it the snipping tool, and that's the actual one. Because what I found, it got rid of it's kind of the shortcuts still work either way. So anyway, they've merged them. So now we've got a new snipping tool in Windows 11 that's based on the old snipping tool, but with the features of snip and sketch. So it makes sense to have just the one app, because it was always a bit odd. But I thought the old snipping tool would get replaced, they'll get rid of that at some point. It would just be snip and sketch, but they've kind of brought it back to snipping tool, but with I think a merged code base or whatever. It looks like a nice Windows app with the rounded corners, and it supports the timer delays and all that kind of thing. So a tool I use very often, snip and sketch. So happy to see those functions carry over.
Good. Yeah, I use that all the time.
Yeah. Actually, that will actually be on here as well. On this, that's the amazing thing. This Lumia, because it's on the dev channel, we'll have the new snip and sketch on there. The other thing, the calculator got updated with they said more rounded corners, and the mail app got updated. They said, but I spent ages looking at the mail app on my Surface Go on the beach channel, on the dev channel, and this one on the beach channel, and side by side, I couldn't see any difference. So it's supposedly to have some of the aesthetics of Windows 11, but the mail tool definitely needs a bit of an overhaul, I think. So I wonder, it'll be interesting to see how many more of those built-in Windows apps, the inbox apps, actually get updated and ship with the OS, or when the OS gets released, how many of those inbox apps has changed as well. So we'll have to wait and see. But some of them have got more UI changes than others. And also as well, as you mentioned, the ISO for Windows 11 is now available, the official release ones as well. So you can get 22.0.0.132, which was released 2 weeks ago. And that's available with beta and dev versions as well. So you can give that a try as well. So, and I'll put it on my screen now. I'll share the screen, some of the updated pictures from the updated inbox apps. So there's the new snipping tool. I say it's more of a merge between the two of them, and the updated calculator, which Microsoft said was rewritten in C#. F# would be a good development language for a calculator, I would have thought. And you've got the new mail tool. Anybody familiar with the old one would probably not be able to spot any differences on there. So those are the new apps, and I say I've got videos of all those on there. And you can get the ISO. The good thing about the ISO as well is that you can do a clean install, and you can install it on Hyper-V or whatever. I did try that last week, and that works. That works really well. You can create a Gen 2 Hyper-V session with use the ISO, and you can get Windows 11 up and running in Hyper-V, and it works. It works pretty well. No major issues on that for me. So It's a good way of testing Windows 11. I actually did an article on how to test Windows 11 on Hyper-V if you want as well. So if you want to give that a try. And I also did an article on how to join the Insider program and test Windows 11, because that's always, if you've got a spare device, it's worth looking at. The other thing that's changed as well is they updated the Microsoft Store. So Microsoft Store was a bit buggy in Windows 11. It looks nice and pretty, but it always shows you old apps that in the list, and it doesn't show you what's been recently updated, and it was pretty slow. But they've updated that as well on the dev channel, so that's much better now. You can filter and sort. Mainly sort is what you want to do, because you can view your library and you can sort it by what you sort of got recently and filter it by what's installed and what's not installed on this device, that kind of thing. So the store seems to be much better in that latest update that came out, separate to the build actually, but I think it was on Monday that came out. So now we're still waiting for the information on the release date. I think October seems likely, but Microsoft haven't announced anything. I did see, I think there's a screenshot. I'll see if I can find it while we're talking. Of you know, Microsoft like to put screenshots with date and times in. So if you remember, I think a lot of screenshots for Windows 10 mobile always had the certain date on it, and it was the release date of Windows 10 mobile. I think it was, the whatever the date would be, and I think I found it as well, so I can show you what I mean on here. So this is this Microsoft revealing the date for us in advance? So if you see here this screenshot from the Microsoft blog post in June, right down the bottom there, the date is the 20th of October 21 at 11:11 a.m. So is that the release date of Windows? Yeah. Windows 11. It'd be good if it was, but especially as they've had that screenshot there since June. But I don't know whether that's just was a good placeholder. But if you notice that there's a few screenshots and they all have the same date timestamp, apart from a couple towards the end of it. So there you can see all these pre-generated images that they use to demonstrate stuff have got that date on there as well. So anyway, that's my guess, is that maybe that's the release date for Windows 11. But there's a few UI bugs and things like that. But it does feel like it's pretty much done now. I guess they're just tidying things up.
Yeah, I think that's all they're doing at the moment.
And it's going to consumers first, isn't it? So I don't think enterprises will look at this. Well, I certainly won't look at this, rolling this out in this year anyway. You want it to settle down before let the consumers test it first. I suppose it's when it comes on new hardware will be when businesses will start to get it. So if you get your standard Dell or HP machine and it comes with pre-image with Windows 11, that's probably when you start to consider that. But yeah, it's looking quite good. So we mentioned earlier on before that it's on currently, the builds are on sale on beta and dev. But I did get an automated email from Microsoft saying you've got a device on the dev channel. Now's a good time to consider your channels. Which yeah. So the reason is that they're saying that the dev is going to be getting future builds from the future. No, not builds from the future. That's it's not a time travel. Builds meant for future versions of Windows 11 rather than the version that's going to ship in October, or 20th of October. I think the way it's going to work now is if you're on beta, you'll get the version that ships in October or whenever it's released, and that'll go to release preview probably the month before, and dev will start to get effectively builds from the first update to Windows 11, which will be during the first half of next year, or even maybe the second half of next year. So that's why they've split those up. So and that's why if you're using it on a machine that you maybe don't want to have to wipe, or you're a bit worried about, and you're currently on dev, now is a good time to switch to the beta channel. And then you could even then go to release preview, and from release preview to release. So it's a way of getting your machine back on the release support chain. If you're on dev, then this is your only chance, your only way to get back to normal without wiping your machine. So think about it now. I think that's what Microsoft is saying. So yeah, as far as I can see, Windows 11 is going great. Yes, there's issues and bugs, but there's still plenty of time for them to fix it. But I think it's working well. I've been using it on my Surface laptop here, which is my main device, and it's been working great. So I've got on a variety of devices. I have put together a few resources, how to do things with Windows and things like that. So I'll add to that as I do more. And of course, when you get the ISO, you can try the new out of box experience, which is slightly different to the old one as well. And the best thing about it is you can name your PC when you do the initial setup. So no more desktop ABCQ772. X. You actually get to name it.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah, I do. I like that. So that's really good. So yeah. Anyway, that's where we are with Windows 11. Plenty going on, and I've got a feeling maybe as this show goes out on Thursday, we'll get a build Thursday evening that could potentially be a different build number from Dev and Beta. So we'll see. Still no sign of Android apps either yet, so they've got to get that too.
Right. Well, I guess that's the point. At the point where they have to lock down to all these system restrictions, so maybe that's why they haven't got it. Yeah,
maybe. Yeah. So I don't know when that's coming, and as you mentioned that as well.
Yeah. I was going to say that'd be fantastic if you could get Android apps running on your Lumia.
Well, yeah, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? So that would be full circle then, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'll have to keep the machine around. I'll keep my Lumia up and running for that, because that would be good to see as well, and on my Raspberry Pi as well.
Yeah.
And the minimum requirements and things like that, they still haven't officially announced those, so we're still waiting to hear what those will be. So I imagine there'll be some blog post announcing the release date and the minimum specs as well. Whether they'll relent and drop down to Gen 7 Intel core processors, we'll have to see. Currently, it's 8th Gen is the minimum requirements, but we'll wait and see. What else? Away from Windows 11, just one other thing. I don't know. There's probably not that many people listening who have a Surface Duo, but I finally got Android Auto working on here this week as well. So Android Auto via wireless. I've used it within a Samsung Galaxy. It works great in the car. I could never get it to work with the Surface. It always just errored, and I went on the Reddits and fiddled around and looked for settings. Anyway, I found if you put it, you've got to put it into dev mode for some reason. You put the Android Auto into dev mode, developer mode, and all of a sudden it all works. So
must be
I've got that working.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they mustn't have signed something, I'm guessing. I think that's what it is.
Or multiple, or the screen resolution, because unless you're in dev mode, you can't run on strange screen sizes. So maybe that's part.
So that's probably a big part of it. Yeah. So so I've got that working now. So
it's got it running in time for Android to get rid of Android Auto.
Yeah. Now I've just got into it, so I like Android Auto.
Yeah. Well, Android Auto app on Windows on Android is going away. Obviously, on the car it won't go away. You still be able to plug your device in and get Android Auto, but the Android Auto
the standalone sort of version of it,
it will be disappearing. But you can still run on the Android Auto in the car, of course, which is good.
Yeah, it's quite good actually. I've never used it before because my car's got quite the touchscreen dash stuff is pretty good, so I've never really needed to use it. But it's one of those things I thought I want to try it, see if I can get it working, and it's actually quite good. And you can flick between the car's system and Android Auto really easily as well. Although I did notice it does a bit of battery drain because it's doing like screen projection, so it does use your battery while you're doing that. So if you've got a long journey, you probably want to have it on charge while you're using Android Auto. Don't use all your charge up, especially if you've got an EV.
Yes, indeed. I know you wouldn't use your power up in a very long time.
Yeah, I suppose Android Auto is not going to take a significant drop
No.
on an EV.
I mean, although it does depend on where the power's coming from. If it's coming from your 12-volt battery, and then maybe you would do. And one of the tricks, I mean, top trick for EVs, it's counterintuitive for a lot of people. When you stop the car and you want to run things like screens and everything like that, you don't put it in accessory mode. You just leave it running, because if you leave it running, it's usually charging the 12-volt. And
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Used for power stuff, and it doesn't. There's no danger in using it running as long as you don't put it in gear. I mean, I wouldn't advise leaving it running if you've got your kids sitting in the front seat playing with the car, but but you shouldn't do that anyway. But yeah, if you're just sitting there watching, if you're charging and you want to watch TV or something, just put it in running mode. And most cars will let you do that, and most of them will then charge the 12-volt while they're running. Because for some stupid reason, most EVs don't charge the 12-volt when they're in accessory mode. It just does seem odd to me. But I guess that's because the full blown high voltage system has not been powered up at that point.
Yeah,
probably for safety reasons. So, but yeah, and the fact that you still rely on 12-volt batteries is a bit of a it's a bit of a weird one.
Yeah, I suppose that's like for backwards compatibility mode, is it? I suppose to affect it with accessories and things like that.
Yeah.
But you think they would be able to use a regulator or a transformer or something rather than require? So do EVs have an old traditional 12-volt battery in there?
They do at the moment. Some of them have 24-volt batteries. Some of them are. There's a move towards different types of batteries for the accessory running stuff. But most of them still have a conventional 12-volt. And some of those, I mean, this has actually been some of the issues with vehicles. I mean, I think someone just thought, oh, it's okay, we can just use a standard 12-volt battery like we've always done. But actually charging those off a high voltage system isn't necessarily the best way to do it. You'd probably be better off with some sort of capacitor-based system which gets charged at the high voltage and then transforms down to the 12 volts. But anyway, I'm sure that will come. I think as we get more and more EVs built from the ground up, because a lot of the problem is a lot of these are built on old ICE platforms, or internal combustion engine platforms. So I think that they've got the 12-volt battery there, so they leave it in there, and it's not the best fit. So you do find a lot of battery drain problems on the 12-volt. Not on the big battery. You usually find a car's got massively full battery and you still can't start it because you haven't got 12-volt on some of these older cars. The more modern cars don't tend to have this as an issue, but it's certainly noticeable on some. But yeah, top tip: run it in ready mode.
And it's only a couple of weeks off you going to the fully charged.
End of next week, so I probably won't be on the show next week because I'll be getting travelling down, but the end of next week we've got the fully charged live where we will be doing our interview set. We've got a space set aside for us to be able to work on actually inside. The rest of the events outside, but we're allowed inside with us, so can run interviews and things, and we'll be able to do whatever we need to do to get that done. And I've already been lining up some pretty high players in the EV world to come on the show, including someone who I don't think anybody's ever interviewed before, which is Instavolt's head of the chairman, I think, or the managing director, one of the two, who's coming on to talk about their expansion as well. That's really interesting to see. Yeah,
so it sounds like it's going to be a good show. That anyway, you certainly got stuff lined up. I've seen there's I see their press emails and there's loads of stuff they're announcing. People going and different exhibits.
I mean, but you'll be able to see virtually every EV which is available in the UK is going to be there. There's loads of really good talks. If you're at all EV skeptical, they'll dispel the skepticism, I think, and cover off some of the things which have been said on TV recently. How anybody could say you can only take an EV 50 miles when I was actually watching that, having driven 250 miles a month, I'm not quite sure, but that's the way it goes. But,
so that's, and can anybody still get tickets to go and see?
You can, they reckon they'll be selling tickets. Right, Dan said they'll be selling tickets right up to the day, and I think that's likely the case. Although it is getting quite busy. Some of the days are getting quite full, but I suspect we will have the longest ever traffic jam involving EV cars going up to Farnborough, but the event itself, I mean, the park, there's loads of parking there. I think it'll be probably the most EVs in one space.
Yeah, oh, that's that'd be good. So I'm looking forward to some of that content.
Yeah.
And I think you had an update as well from another guest that we had a couple of weeks ago, GridServe.
Oh yeah. So Sam came off from GridServe and was talking about the process they were doing to upgrade all the electric highway chargers, which is something which is well sought by most EV drivers. Certainly ones who've got CCS based cars, common charge standard cars, which is most of the modern ones, because they used to have very minimal numbers of those at most charging points, and some of them didn't have them at all. And they're making really good progress still. I mean, they do seem to have slowed down a little bit in the last few weeks, but probably weather hasn't helped, rain and things. But they're starting to expand. They've started to do ones in Scotland recently. So they're fairly well on target, I think, for the end of the year. I think they may struggle to meet their September target they set themselves, but certainly the end of the year they should make. And yeah, it's going well. The upgrades are working well. I've used them quite regularly, and they work really well for me. For some people, they're not working quite so well, though. Some of the older car drivers, certainly the Nissan Leaf drivers, are a little bit up in arms because, well, for one thing, they've lost some of the shadow mode chargers, which they used to have at some of the event sites, because they've been replaced by CCS ones, which makes me happier, but it makes them less happier because there's a bit more contention. But also, they're not getting the charge rates they're expecting to get. So it's taking longer to actually charge up. And I know this is something GridServe are aware of, that they're looking into it. I'm sure they'll try and solve it with the software. I think this is going to be great, actually, because GridServe are really proactive at chasing down the suppliers on this stuff and trying to get the software sorted out. And I don't think anybody has been up to now. So I think the suppliers of the EVs, supply equipment, the EVSEs, the actual chargers, have been a little bit lax on some of their stuff. They've just got them out there and haven't really bothered about what the end users are seeing, because they don't care, because they don't sell to the end users, they sell to the charge point distributors. So the networks, so unless the networks are complaining, they're just going to produce the same old stuff. And some of the software has been very poor on some of these devices. Some of them are brilliant. There's an Australian brand called Tritium, who are fantastic. That's what Instavolt use. So I think that's a very good. The software on those is brilliant as well as a user. But some of the more typical ones I honestly use, and also Ecotricity used to use, and electric, and the ones that Electric Highway now installing have not been as good in that respect. And some software has left a lot to be desired. But I think I'm going to find Electric Highway are driving that quite hard to get that sorted out and fixed. So, I mean, for example, this whole thing about dual charging on a ABB charger, the ABB chargers have had multiple connectors on them for years. It's just never been able to charge two things at once, and yet that's totally feasible with the hardware they've got. It's just the software has not been updated to allow them to do it, and they're driving hard to get that done. And obviously that will split the power to the two cars, but that usually works out okay, because normally with an electric vehicle, one car will be some way on in its charge cycle before the next one turns up. If you both turn up at once, then you obviously won't get full power. But if you're, and this used to be the same with the old Tesla superchargers, they used to be in pairs. And if you were on the A machine, the person who joined on the B machine would get less power until you got to the point where you were drawing less power. And that's what happens with the charge curve of an electric vehicle. It starts off quite fast, depending on what state it charges, but low state charge, it starts off quite fast, and then it gradually goes down towards, when you get towards that 70-80% on most cars, it starts to slow down very much so it's almost not worth staying beyond that. Some of the more modern cars, it's probably 90%, because they actually don't use the full battery capacity, so it's actually a real 90%. Is actually 80%, because they topped and tailed the charge rate. But it's certainly not worth saying beyond that. But it does mean that if you're charging, you've been charging for 20 minutes, and someone else comes in and plugs in, they can get more power because there's a bit available.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned basically it's just like when you're filling a tank up, there's pressure. There's no pressure in when you start, is there? And then as you get more, you're cramming that electricity into the container. Yeah, it gets resistance. Yeah.
I mean, the other way I've been had it explained to me, which I don't quite like, it is like you go to the cinema and you've got to find a seat which is free. There's no sort of predefined seating. It's not named seats. So you're looking through the whole of the cinema to find a seat. When you first go in, that's easy. There's loads of holes there to get into. But when you further on the charging, it's much more difficult to find a hole to get into. And that's the same way the irons are trying to find a space to fit in. That's very simplified, but that's basically what's happening. So, and they keep banging into the other ones, which makes heat come out. So as you get more power or more capacity filled up in the battery, the warmer it starts to get, because these things are bashing into each other because they can't find space to get through. So that's where some of the research and development is going into batteries at the moment, to try and solve this issue by doing things like lining all these bits up so they fill in nicely arranged, instead of this sort of hickory-pickory crystalline infrastructure, but it actually is nicely lined up things so they can just charge each column at a time, and it doesn't get this problem with. So you then get a nice smooth charge curve, which is a much better approach for charging a vehicle. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of things going on this, but at the moment there's still a need to be able to have multiple cars charging at the same time off the lines. I think the biggest issue for most of these motorway service ones will actually be the space for people to park to do this charging, because some of them are in quite tight spacings. So you don't know if you'd be able to get two cars next to each other in some of them, but yeah, that's good. But no, it's good to see it's happening. It's good to see it progressing. It's also interesting that there's been a couple of announcements this week from people other than GridServe who are doing similar things to GridServe, starting all electric charging points areas. So MFG, the Motor Fuel Group, who owns an awful lot of service stations. I mentioned them before, that they've got one up north in Crows Hill, which has got quite a lot of chargers and hub. They're down there, so they're going to do that quite a few other places in the country. There's one of the big construction companies has now funded the idea of basically EV service stations, very much like GridServe's service station. Who they're going to use for their actual power suppliers, I'm not sure, for their actual chargers. But that'll be interesting, because that's another approach where it's a service station centre specifically for EVs again. So with cafe, etc., but no petrol pumps. So it's going to be interesting to see how this comes up. But yeah, and the first one of those is going to be quite near me at Kettering. They've actually just announced when they're going to start construction of that one. So that'll be interesting to see how it turns out in a couple of years' time. I think in a year's time, this whole thing of being worried about charging will go away. Although the reliability's got to be there as well. But once you start getting service stations set up for it, you've got people on site who are going to be seeing that these charges are causing the problems and getting fixed. Whereas at the moment they tend to be remote places where nobody ever sees them, and it's only when the drivers report it that you've got a problem. So hopefully that will be less of an issue going forward. And then getting the car compatibility sorted out, I think that's got to be coming on as well. I think still see that way too much. That the issues particularly on CCS, which is I've often described it as a non-standard standard, because it's so vague in certain bits, and things like cable length and position of charge ports isn't actually mentioned in the standard at all. So car manufacturers can put the charge port anywhere they like, and charging manufacturers put the cable length anywhere they like. So sometimes you get cables which are way too short to reach people's ports. Not all the charge manufacturers are like that, but some of them are. So I think there's a lot to be done on that, but hopefully that's starting to come together. I know the government's really pushing on a lot of this stuff at the moment, standards and things. I think we need to bring British standards back now. We're not in the EU. We'll have to actually get formal standards for some of this stuff. Have a BS standard for charge ports, that'd be quite good. But yeah, I think that and certainly type approval for vehicles ought to take this into account as well going forward. That you can't have a charge port where it can't be actually reached for charging. That's a silly idea. So it's like they banned certain positions of petrol pump ports because they were silly ideas. But
and people get used to where they are and everything else. So yeah, I think it becomes common practice, whether it's an actual prescribed standard, but it becomes a common thing, isn't it? I've often wondered why car manufacturers of the petrol or diesel pumps, some on one side, some on the other. I always wondered if that was some kind of load balancing issue, that it was actually a good way of making sure that people could use both sides all the time by having some manufacturers use one, some use the other.
Yeah, I mean, at one stage it was depending where you were built, where the car was built, which country it was built in. The port would be filler cap would be on one side or the other. He's saying port charge port for petrol cars. That's not quite the right thing.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the same thing. Is it if all like EVs are in the same charging ports in the same place, it's okay. But if they're in different places, and you got to some people have to reverse in, some people drive in. It's just getting it's because it's all new, I suppose. It's all getting used to it.
Yeah. Of course, the other standards issue at the moment is the, and I've mentioned this before, is the whole parking slot. And there was a couple of articles about cars getting bigger, and some of that was being blamed on EVs, but it's not really to do with EVs at all. It's all to do with impact protection. The fact that the cars are getting wider because we happen to have side impact curtains now to get through the safety test. So to do that, you have to have wider side panels, and that makes cars wider. Even the smallest cars are going to get wider. And yet we still have a standard for parking spaces which was created in the 50s, which is obviously not appropriate anymore. So yeah, that's a potentially big issue. I think the fact we'll all be buying cars we can't park.
yeah, I'm looking for fighting over ports. But that's the thing, though. Like you said before, you don't really have. It's not always essential to charge every it's not like a fuel petrol car. You can plan your journey out, and maybe you don't need to charge and all that kind of stuff. So all that comes into it.
Yeah, it's like I charged my car 2 weeks ago, and I just charged it again overnight last night to top it up. And in that time, I've done about 200 miles worth of journeys because that's what the charge will take. And I still had a bit left over, so it wasn't like I was desperate to charge it, but for the little tiny commutes I do, to trips to the shops and everything like that, charge once a week, and you just top up. I mean, it's not like you're charging all the time. So, I mean, my car will actually take 2 nights to fully charge if I was on the cheap rate bit I've got. It's only 3 hours of really cheap rate, but I can do 2 lots of 3 hours and get pretty much fully charged, and that's really cheap. I mean, it's less than 10p a kilowatt hour, so it's really cheap how to do that. To run a car on that price is ridiculous. I mean, yes, charging on the road is expensive. If you're going on a long trip and you need to charge at service stations other than grid service on a fairly reasonable price, you're going to be paying 40p plus a kilowatt hour, which for some electric vehicles is actually more expensive than running petrol would be, or certainly running diesel would be. But if you're starting with a full tank, then that's not so much of an issue. I want to see a lot more destination charging. I think charging on the road is great, but as we start getting 300-mile range cars, most journeys we do in the UK will be within that range. And if you could arrive somewhere and then charge overnight cheaply on a much lower cost charger, because we don't need all these high-powered chargers for destinations. I really don't understand why all the hotels have got high-powered chargers and not low-powered ones. They could install 6 or 7 low-powered chargers for the same cost as doing one of these high-powered chargers.
Yeah.
And that would service their guests more. And because most of the time the guests it's going to be overnight charging rather than sort of pull up and charge. Although I have made use of hotel chargers, and it's quite nice to be able to go to a hotel fast charger and go in for a cup of coffee and actually have a much better experience than you would potentially at the services. But even so, it still baffles me to some extent when you're thinking about what their main business is, which is overnight stays, that they don't have that sort of catering for their guests. Some of them do. There are a couple there's a couple of very useful ones down near the Eurotunnel which have that. So you park overnight, charge up, and then you're ready to go in the morning. Except for when you get delayed on the M25, like I did on my journey to Berlin, and then only have a few hours to charge, so you have to do a mad dash to charge when you get over the other side. But that would, I think, would be alleviate a lot of these issues if you knew that when you got to any destination you can charge. I mean, like I went up to the northeast of you, up near Morecambe a little while ago, and I was able to go into Lancaster. And they've got loads of destination charges there in the car parks. So when I got up there, I was quite low charge, but I went in, explored Lancaster, went to the castle, came back, and my car was fully charged. And that was basically for the cost of parking, which is a really good way of doing it. You don't need high-powered, expensive chargers if you've got good destination charging. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's something which I think will happen over time. But it's good to see the en route charging improving. I think that's definitely going to be better. And that's actually one of the reasons why people think, oh, we're going to have chargers on every single parking spot in these services because everybody will want to turn up and want to charge. That's not going to happen. Most car journeys will not need to stop and charge. It's going to only be particularly the long ones which are going to need to stop and charge, and those people won't be all turning up at once. I mean, you do get occasions when Rugby, which is the first grid serve hub, has got all the chargers in use, but that tends to only be when then there's a couple of superchargers nearby, and they were turned off a few weeks ago, and that's why they were all in use, because everybody was turning out the one space, and even then the queue wasn't more than a few minutes. So I think it's not a major thing. I mean, it will get worse. We are getting more adoption. If everybody's got EVs, that's going to need a few more chargers. But hubs of 40 or 50 chargers should do it on every services, and I think that's actually feasible to do with electrical supply. You won't need every single parking space. You might want to put some AC chargers onto every single charging space, so you can just have a quick top up while you're eating, because you can get a few miles that way. But yeah, it's the way we go. But interesting stuff. It's nice to see it improving.
Yeah, well, I look forward to hearing more from Fully Charged in a few weeks' time when you get those interviews. Yeah,
well, lining them up. They're all coming to us now, so they want to talk to us. So that's good to see. Yeah,
and hopefully next week Richard should be back with us. He was hoping to join us tonight, but we had to change our schedule slightly. He couldn't make it, so hopefully next week he'll be back with us, and we may even have Android apps to test and talk about next week on Windows. You never know. So Gary, where can we find you?
You can find me at Garry WMA on Twitter, and you can also find me on Fascinating Tech, because we have finally got the issue out.
Hey.
The new issue is out, so it's I'm talking e-bikes, which is quite interesting. Nice little folding e-bike we tested, some baby technology, which was quite interesting to test. Got a build it yourself telescope, which I actually really quite liked. That was quite impressive, and the Sphero, which I know we've tested before, the robotic ball thing, they've come up with a little kit for teaching basically robotics and programming, and it's brilliant, really brilliant. That's one of our truly fascinating award winners. We haven't had one of those for a while, so that's in this issue. So there's lots of things to read, and lots of smart home stuff as well.
Excellent. Right, well, we should be back same time, same place next week. You can email me, ian@thedigitalifestyle.com. I'm at Dixon on Twitter, so we'll see you next week.
Take care.